Hi, Greg. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Bonnie. Thanks for having me.
So, yeah, just wondering, what kind of materials you use mostly for a lot of your work.
As far as the paintings themselves, I work only in acrylic these days. When I first started painting, I worked in oils for a few years, and it just seemed a lot more complicated to get good at than acrylic was. For whatever reason, acrylic was a lot easier for me to work with. I think because of the quick dry time. So I've been working in acrylic since 2009, and I've been airbrushing it with acrylics for the last 2 years. So pretty much, I do my underpainting sometimes, like drawing things out in graphite or whatever. But the painting itself is all acrylic
Do
nowadays.
a lot of your work to me almost looks like it's been done digitally. Do you ever do digital work?
I don't, and I hear that so often. That's actually one of my favorite compliments, though, because that means that I'm achieving some sort of uh, high standard of realism, which is what I'm always going for. So I don't work digitally, except in a way because I work a lot from photographs of assemblages that I build. I will kind of play around with those images in Photoshop and do different things to it, and sometimes cut things out and put them back together. But it's very simple kind of stuff. I've never made any sort of refined digital art, although I am interested in it because I see a lot of potential in it. But the weird thing about it is, like, I want to make something that's tactile and real, and I've always felt digital art. I don't know if I would like the fact that it only exists, inside a computer. It's not like an actual thing. So that's one thing that's kind of held me back from making it.
Yeah, and also when you say you do assemblages, are you saying that you do like little sculptures? Or what do
Yeah,
you mean by that?
yeah.
As a reference?
So most of my paintings, not all of them, but probably about 70-80% of my paintings are actually pretty much still lifes of things that I build. And I just collect different kinds of materials that are interesting to me, either because they have a sort of simple geometric quality that I can use. For instance, like um, a lot of things like office supplies or tools or parts of toys that I've taken apart or various things. I collect stuff and I strip it down and build new things out of it and paint it and make sort of weird sculptures out of it, which I then use for my paintings.
Can you tell us a little bit about your process? I mean, I know you've already told us about some of your process, but can you tell us a bit more about it?
So I don't really like to work from specific ideas most of the time. Um, for me, it's sort of about stumbling into something that just looks cool. It has it meets a certain criteria of my aesthetics, but for the most part, there's a lot of chance involved in how I approach making art. So even when I'm building stuff, it's not with any sort of plan. I have this one thing in my head, which is like, if things go together that are unrelated, but for whatever reason fit together, then that's just like, that's what guides me. So I'll just start putting things together according to some sort of subconscious trajectory I'm not really aware of. But for whatever reason, these things just seem to build themselves. And then within that, like photographing it, I'll get in there and I'll find these little moments in it that are just really amazing. And so it's sort of like the art is like something that I capture more than I create in terms of getting ideas on what to paint.
That's an amazing and very different process. I I don't think too many artists that or none that I know of actually build little things and then use that as a reference. But I mean, I'm sure, I don't know, a lot of people do. But uh, tell me, how long have you been painting for?
I started painting in 2006, so that was my sophomore year of college. I studied art at the University of Texas, and in my third year, I'd already done like a couple years of drawing and design, and I really wanted to become a painter, even though I'd never painted in my life. I just decided to put everything into that. So I switched gears from mainly working in like pen and ink drawings, and decided I wanted to learn how to paint. And so that was 11 years ago.
So
So
did you enjoy your time at college? Was it college or
yeah, it
university?
was college.
So,
Yeah,
so it
it
was
was
good.
college. It was, it was good for me. I didn't get a lot of specific advice on technique per se. It wasn't really about that so much as I got a lot of discipline out of such a large amount of studio hours I had to commit to. So that really helped me just get into that habit of painting for many hours every day and having sort of a schedule and a rhythm to completing things. And then a whole lot of art history too, obviously gave me context to what I was doing, which I probably wouldn't have had if I hadn't been in school. So, but the actual like work of figuring out all the technical stuff, I feel like a lot of that has just been through my own trial and error and research. So, and I'm still learning to this day. I mean, I YouTube technique all the time. There's so much information out there, so many things to try. I don't feel like I'll ever really be out of that mode of learning new things as a painter because there's so much to keep going with. Um, Especially since I switched to airbrushing like 2 years ago, I still have tons to learn with that. I mean, I barely scratched the surface of what I can do with that. So, um, freakazoidal tendencies. I don't know what I was thinking. Uh, yeah, I don't know why I chose that title. It seemed like a goofy painting, and I wanted a goofy title. So,
And
yeah,
where were you when you
yeah.
painted it? Just at
I
home?
just finished that. I just finished that painting like a couple of weeks ago. That painting is actually based on photographs I took at the Denver Museum of Art about 2 years ago. They had this really awesome samurai show where they just had all this armor um, of samurai, and out of a lot of those pictures, I've taken like just tiny little details of their armor and use that as a template to just kind of play with in my image and add some other things into. And that's really, like I said earlier, that's sort of my preferred way to work, is to just stumble into um, a composition that's going to work for me, and once I have that in place, then I can sort of build around it and get where I want to get in the painting process.
And did you use any airbrush in this painting? 'Cause, parts of it looked
Yeah,
like they've been airbrushed.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Definitely, almost all of it really is airbrush. I mean, I do a lot of detailing with fine line brushes, but yeah, it's a lot of airbrush. In that painting, I used a lot of like any of the like straight line repetitive stuff you see was done with hair combs and picks, hair picks, and a few different materials I used to do texture with. But yeah, there's a lot of airbrush going on
And
there.
obviously some stencils and things like that. I suppose the
I
airbrush, that's the whole of
I
airbrushing though, is stenciling, I suppose.
I don't use a whole lot of stenciling, at least not like um, I don't really use hardly any sort of like store-bought stencils because I feel like, for one thing, I don't like the two-dimensional quality of most of that stuff. It's like very flat patterns. And so even though I will cut my own hand-cut stencils, I usually um, use liquid latex to mask different areas off of a painting. I don't use a whole lot of stencil at this point.
And I see you've got a few realistic studies. Um, a portrait on illustration board I knocked out last week. Oh my goodness. That's amazing. Is that of someone you know?
Yes. Yeah. So that is a daughter of one of my friends. So I do portraits on the side here and there, and in fact, I'm interested in doing more of that, um, because I feel like I'm pretty good at it, and it's, commission work isn't always fun, but at least you're getting paid, and sometimes it's nice to just set aside like a certain amount of my time just to work on stuff like that, because it keeps things going, and they're pretty easy. I'm really quick with graphite, so I spent about 10 years drawing before I ever started painting, so that's a skill set that I really had spent a lot of time developing only to abandon. And getting back into that in the last year or so has been really good for me, because I'm like, whoa, why have I been ignoring this for the last decade? This is easy for me. So I want to do more of that. I think I've done about 7 portraits this year so far, and I'm pretty happy with all of them. So, but that's such a different side for me than what my paintings are, obviously.
All right, so this painting is a collaboration with another artist.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. How do you find working with other artists?
Um, Byron's a good friend of mine that I've known for a long time, and he's actually the person who got me interested in airbrushing, because he had pretty much only painted with airbrush. Um, but he's sort of also, um, I got him to start working in color because he'd only worked in black and white for the longest time, and I've sort of been his technical advisor on a lot of stuff. So for me, really one of the best ways to teach is to jump in there with somebody and just, you learn a lot more from working side by side with somebody than really any other way. And so he developed a lot of that composition, and then I would come in and do things to it, and it turned out really well. I'm very happy with that painting. I don't do a lot of collaborations though, and I think it's just hard for me because I am sort of a control freak. I don't mean to be. I'm so I'm anal and perfectionist about my paintings that, so I don't feel like I necessarily always work well with other people, and it's not because I don't trust their competency. It's just me wanting to do my thing and not knowing how to like ease back on it. But I am interested in doing more of that in the future, and it's probably something I can get over eventually. But I'm always upfront about that because I don't know. I just get going in a painting, and whatever happens, happens. And I have painted over people's stuff before in a way that didn't make them happy, and you know, so that for that reason, I don't do a whole lot of
Yeah,
it.
because a lot of it is like partly subconscious, and you don't actually know what you're doing. And then if you working with someone else, you've got to articulate what you're doing, which is, in order to negotiate what's going on. Look, I do also find, yeah, collaborations difficult, but yeah, I suppose that's part of the challenge of it is that it is difficult. So,
Yeah, yeah.
and this metallic automator, oil on wood, that's, oh my gosh, that's amazing. That looks like a next level sort of lawnmower or something.
It was actually like a really big master lock, which I like glued some little pieces to, and it's actually really simple composition. It was just this simple shape with a really nice shadow and lighting on it and stuff. But yeah, thank you. That was definitely one of my first oil paintings that I felt like I got kind of close to photorealism with, you know. Um, That was right around the time I stopped painting in oils too. I think I might have done a couple more after that, but that was that same period where I pretty much started working in acrylics. So
Yeah, it's intriguing because everything reads perfectly as an object, yet you still don't know what it is.
yeah, yeah. Well, ambiguity is like such a major part of what I do, and it's on purpose. I like my subject matter to hover between somethingness and nothingness. I think that makes it more interesting. And I also think it allows for simultaneous interpretations of what it could be. So it could be something happening in an extreme microcosmic setting, like on a cellular or even atomic level, or it could be some sort of um, hypnagogic hallucination. You know, it could be all these different things at the same time. You know, so that's something I've always kind of valued. Anything can become alien when you decontextualize it, and so that's pretty much what I try and do. I try and take things and strip away any sort of meaning or identity, and that makes it alien, which leaves it open to a lot of interpretations.
Tell me something. You obviously don't find acrylic too difficult to blend, do you? Or you blend it in
Um,
small sections?
um, yeah, it's it took me a long time. Well, not that long, but it took me a long time to get comfortable blending in acrylics. Obviously, oil paint has a much more buttery sort of texture, and it is way easier to blend. Um, but acrylic, you just have to get a feel for what it does as it's drying. I think it's hard to blend, for me anyways, to blend like wet paint together. So I usually start with one color and then come in once it's dry with another color, and it's easier for me to blend that out. And with airbrush, it's super easy because it really lends itself to doing like really smooth transitions. But that painting, I was not airbrushing when I made it. Um, and the way I actually did that piece was I took a square piece of glass and I glued a bunch of small tiled mirrors to it. And then I propped that up against the headlight of a car and lit it up with a lamp. And so that's how I came up with that image.
The painting Astro Dynamo is absolutely insane.
And that's the direction I'm trying to do more of, is just getting really crazy with how meticulously detailed I can get in the setups that I'm making. And that painting in particular, out of everything I've done in the last couple of years, I'm very happy with how that turned out. That's really what I want to do more of.
Or this painting's a little bit different, Scorpio Sublime. It reminds me a little bit,
Okay.
well, maybe
Okay.
slightly of Alex Gray for some reason, but um,
Yeah.
anyway, I'll
Yeah.
let you uh, gold leaf on illustration board. So that was quite an early work.
Yeah, yeah, that was sort of an experimental piece for me. Although I'm getting back to gold leaf recently, not in the paintings themselves, but I've been gold leafing some of the stuff that I'm building. I don't know what I was going for in that painting. Yeah, it's definitely shows a sort of influence of Alex Gray and Giger, I think too. Um, but I was just interested in working with iridescent materials and with gold leaf, and wanted to just do something a little different. So I've never really made any other paintings like that, but and the painting itself is really kind of hard to photograph. I never mastered how to work with iridescent pigments in a way to where the painting looks good from every angle, because it really doesn't. It really depends on the lighting, which is like a whole different technical aspect that I would have to deal with if I wanted to do more of that.
And in the painting Psychotronic Reflection, you've got the grid happening again. And then,
Hmm.
as you say, you've got
Hmm.
what looks like maybe a space age device. Um, with some amazing texture and very interesting texture down the bottom right. Yeah, interesting use of color with the contrasting green and orange. Yes, I suppose the grid seems to be a little bit of a theme, possibly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's in a lot of psychedelic art. That sort of um, need for like a strong geometric quality. So I've used that several times. Um, Same thing, like when I, just tiled mirrors that I used to make that setup happen, and I think that's actually the same thing that was used in Metallic Automata, the other painting you were talking about, that was oil, but just a different orientation of it. So I will tend sometimes to take some of the very same materials, but pull very different paintings out of it.
Um, okay. And the fourth horseman, is that from, oh, that's obviously Revelations, I'm assuming. Look, I did read said Revelations myself quite a few times because it was quite psychedelic. Although I might, I might, delete that, not put that in.
No, I mean Revelation has no business being in the Bible the way I look at it, because it's so different and has very obvious sort of hermetic symbols to it, and it was rejected by the Byzantine Church for being such a weird book. It's not in their version of the Bible, so yeah, it's a weird book. That painting, that was something I did in art school. I think I was in my junior year of art school when I made that.
All right. And then, another very intriguing painting, uh, Elemental Artiface, which you did last year. So, acrylic on clayboard panel. So, what is a clayboard panel? If I may.
It's basically a piece of masonite with this sort of really hard, smooth gesso material on top of it. Um, and I actually have been working on that quite a bit lately. I like it because it's super hard and smooth. Like I've never really enjoyed painting on canvas all that much. It's just a little too wobbly for me, and I don't like the tooth of it. So I like perfectly hard and flat surfaces to paint on. And so that's what I've been doing lately. I work on clayboard or wood, and I do a lot on watercolor paper too. I've always enjoyed painting on paper. Sometimes I worry about the archival side of that though, just because it is so delicate. And I've actually had paintings that were accidentally torn before. So even when I paint on paper now, I still end up mounting it to wood when I'm done. I just like the feeling of paper for some reason.
Bridge into Hades. Oh.
Another one with the tiles. That was I did a lot of that in 2009, I guess. Um, yeah, I don't know what I was going for in that piece. It was sort of made from some digital remixing of some of the same photo shoot I used to do a higher octave. Um, so it's very similar in a lot of ways. And yeah, I just included these sort of hallucinations of figures within it to make it sort of surreal, the other side kind of motif. So yeah, I like that piece. So
With incorporeal self-portrait. Oil. So this is another oil painting. I see your oil
yeah,
paintings
yeah.
are maybe not as sharp as your acrylic paintings.
I agree. Yeah, and that to me is one limitation I really had with oil paint is, the fact that it's very buttery makes it really great to blend, but for me it also made it sort of difficult to do a lot of fine detail with the way that I'm able to with acrylic paint. And that was probably just my own ineptitude at really understanding how to paint well with oils. But I can get a lot sharper and more detailed with acrylic paint.
First whirlings. So that's one of your first paintings.
Yeah, I started painting in 2006, and I believe that painting was like early 2008. So I've been painting a little while, probably like a year and a half when I made that piece. That was one of the first ones I ever spent a lot of time trying to really nail down um, the detail and whatnot. I mean, I have a lot of paintings from 2006 and 2007 that I definitely wouldn't include on my website or on Instagram just because I was very much still at the beginning and learning how to paint. But that was certainly one of the first early ones that I felt, was pretty strong.
Okay. Um, the gelatinous crab altarpiece, 2014. How do you say that?
The gelatinous crab altarpiece,
Okay, and
and
what were you
and
thinking, Greg?
um, there's sort of a motif of alien iconography I play on in some of my work, where it's sort of modeled after things that you might encounter in religious icons, but I wanted to take that sort of language and put it in outer space and some alien culture. So to me, that painting sort of represents something you might see in a shrine on some other weird planet. But it's very goofy and silly. It's yeah. I don't know what I was going for. I just wanted to make something really kind of outrageous, but that seemed to have sort of a religious quality to it. So the map at the bottom is sort of like, I don't know, it's almost like a star system with some sort of map dividing the space or something.
So you're painting further around the bend, so that's also another early one, and another oil painting as well. Um, and was that just put together, through one of your landscape sculptures?
That one, I think that one was purely out of my imagination, and probably like 20-30% of my work is not done from a reference. It's just me making shapes, and I sort of create chaos, and then I'll start molding that and pulling forms out of it. And I think that's probably more that was created in that manner rather than looking at anything.
And Fabled Beginnings, acrylic on wood, uh, that is next level. Another one of some type of, oh, it looks like a person almost coming out of the box. Is that you coming out of the box, or I suppose you don't ever need to come out of out of the box? But um, yeah, that's incredible.
Thank you. That piece was another sort of alien religious type piece. I sort of thought of the idea of it as being like a creation myth, and that central form was like the discarded helmet of some alien god, and from that it was like dreaming a new creation out of itself. And so there's this pink mohawk of pterodactyls that are flying over out of its head, and the whole thing is like floating in outer space in this electrical chalice. So again, it's like super ridiculous subject matter, but the idea behind it is just sort of creating like a mythological idea with all of those influences being a part of it.
Do you feel like the psychedelic visionary art is excluded from the mainstream? That's a very good question. A question that yeah, a lot of people are asking. It would be interesting to hear your opinion about that.
I think to some degree it is. I think just because the subject matter deals with things that are on the fringe for a lot of people, things like mystical experiences or using psychedelic drugs, which I look at it as being much broader than just those two things. But I think for a lot of outsiders, that seems to be kind of how it's pigeonholed. Um, I think it's maybe a little bit more difficult for people to accept, and yet at the same time, I think that subculture is becoming more and more mainstream. I was in Walmart the other day, and I was blown away by all the like weird, crazy psychedelic T-shirts they have at a big box retailer, you know. And it's like if it's gotten to that point where it's sort of everywhere, then it certainly can't seem like it's being ignored completely. It seems like pop culture has a space for it. So I'm optimistic. I had a show. I was in a group show with four other artists, or five others, I'm sorry, in St. Louis over the summer. And that gallery was, contemporary, but very mainstream. And it was in St. Louis, which is the Midwest, definitely what you would think is more of a conservative part of the US. And yet we were there with our weird, crazy artwork, and so I feel like it is becoming more acceptable and known to the public at this point than it was maybe 10 or 20 years
Wow,
ago.
so things are shifting. That's great. I think people are looking for the next thing, like a refreshing change, from the
Yeah,
what's been happening in
yeah.
the art world for the last decade or two, since Duchamp put the urinal in the gallery. But now this is a question I get all the time. I find it quite annoying, an annoying question, but maybe you don't find it annoying. And that is, how long does the painting more or less take to do?
So that depends on how well it depends on how well it goes from the beginning. There's a lot of ways a painting can go sideways on you, and I'm prone to even abandon paintings that frustrate me too much. So it's not exactly easy to answer, although I do have a sort of ballpark expectation. So it's usually on a smaller painting going to be like 15 to 20 hours, and then larger ones maybe more in the like 40 to 60-hour range. But good art can happen quickly, and bad art can take a long time to make sometimes. So it's just one of those things. Sometimes stars align and everything works out perfectly and easily, and other times it's a huge mess of problem solving that takes me a long time to figure out. So that's my answer. Sometime between 20 and 60 hours,
Yeah,
depending
because
on the size.
sometimes if you
Depending on the
tell the
size.
buyer it took you half a year, the value of the painting goes up. But if you tell them it took you a week, you know, but it depends, for me, how many cups of tea I have, So that's
Yeah,
how
yeah,
many breaks one has in
it's
between. It's
true.
so hard to
It's true.
calculate. Can you tell us where people can see more of your work?
Um, they can see it on Instagram or Facebook and on my website at gregpettitart.com. And I'll be posting any events I do in the near future on Instagram and Facebook because I probably do have some stuff lining up for November and December. Um, and I think that's it. I had some pieces at New Conscious Gallery in Denver, but I think that show has come down. I'm not for certain. That show started in August. It was a group show, so it may be down at this point. So I may not be in any galleries at the moment, although I'm sure I will be within the next few months.
Full, and we'll also put the links below, wherever this video, on the YouTube and also on the Visionary Arts Network website,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
all of that. Oh, beautiful. So, Greg, is there anything else you wanted to add to this little interview?
For Thank you for being interested in what I do. That means a lot. I actually really like your oil paintings too. Very, very sort of bizarre and uh, yeah, very. I almost sort of dark elements to what you're doing, which I like a lot. I like that this whole idea of like visionary or psychedelic art doesn't have to always be the sort of like happy hippie side of things, but there's a lot of room to do all kinds of weird stuff within that, and so very cool stuff.
Thank you so much, Greg. So, Greg, thank you so much for being on the show. That's been amazing. And yeah, and hope to see you again soon sometime.
All right, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on and giving me a platform to talk about what I do.